welcome to Unleash Your Inner Goldilocks, how to get it just right. Thank you so much for joining us for another hour of exciting and insightful conversation. And just like every week, you are absolutely going to love my guest today. And we are going to have such a fantastic conversation. As we get started, let's recap why we meet as a Goldilocks community and what does it mean to get things just right? What does Goldilocks remind you? To me, Goldilocks reminds me of that young girl, the young child in each of us that knew exactly how to influence people and get the results we needed so that we can live a happy, contented, and purposeful life. Somewhere along the way in adulthood, we have forgotten how to make that happen. And we have staked positions in terms of letting our ego take over. And it's been about, it's exactly the way I want it, and everybody has to meet me where I am. But what if we take a step back and tap into that inner child, that inner playfulness, and the ability to gather people around? Research shows that we can each only influence three levels from where we are. So if my position is an extreme right end or a left end, I can only influence three levels towards the center. But if I take the time and invest in those around me and take perspective, and I see how every situation that I care about, that impacts me and that's going to drive my success, how does that influence and impact other people? Once I get that perspective, I am able to collaborate. I am able to come from a place of centeredness. And all of a sudden, I'm in a place where magic can happen. And it allows me to move towards the center of any particular situation and issue. And therefore, I have the inherent ability to influence three levels to my right, three levels to my left, and everybody around the center alongside me. See the magic that just happened. The fact of three levels of influence can be magnified, excuse me, to 7 degrees of influence. And all of a sudden, everything I want to do has a greater impact, and I am able to move the needle much faster and in a more powerful way. Leadership is about the power of influence. And even your purpose sits in the centeredness of 3 things: what you love, what you're great at, and what the world needs. Only when you're able to bring it from that place of centeredness is it going to be fulfilling for you. It's going to create a situation where you're the subject matter expert and a thought leader. And the world is going to create an economic engine for you because the world needs it. If you're stuck in a place where what you love is not allowing you to succeed, take a journey inside of yourself and see if you seriously sit in the place of your purpose. Are you centered on your purpose, where what you love, what you're great at, and what the world needs is coming together? And are you showing up in a way for the world to see you from that place of centeredness? As we go into today's conversation, I want to share 3 ennobling thoughts for us to take into the conversation, because this program is all about ennobling each one of you and each one of us for our own success. So the first ennobling thought I want us to take into the conversation is together we go further. Not alone, together we go further. Working together is like being a spokes in a bicycle wheel. It only works when all the spokes are connected and it's allowing the wheel to rotate and move forward. So together we can ride the distance. Too many times I've heard people say, you know what, I came into this world alone. I'm going to die and leave this world alone. I can figure this out alone, all the while in between. And I always chuckle and say, did you really come in alone? I thought your mother carried you for 9.5 months to term, right? And when we die, it's going to take at least 4 people to carry us to the burial ground or the crematorium. Either way, we don't walk up. So we technically don't come alone. We technically don't leave alone. And there is no reason why we need to believe we got to do this alone. As human beings, we are supposed to be communal. We are supposed to be social. And we function better when we are together. The second ennobling thought I want us to take into the conversation is develop your team to thrive together. Transform to equally embrace your masculinity and femininity. Success comes from balancing results with developing your team. Masculinity and femininity are not gender, but they are character traits and behavioral patterns. Masculine character traits are about results and outcome and success and winning. The femininity character traits are collaboration, support, nurturing, team building, developing others. And we need both. One without the other is empty. If I'm able to drive results, but I don't care about who I'm driving it for, it's going to fall flat. Same way, if I care about my people, but if I can't motivate them to drive results, then all of that caring doesn't result in something tangible. How do we find that centeredness? How do we find that middle ground? And in that centeredness is where we get ennobled and we allow other people to take the journey of ennobling alongside us. The third ennobling thought I want us to talk about is cultivating a co-creative mindset. It's all in our mind, right? What we believe we become. So co-creation is a way forward to collaborate for mutual success. We only thrive together, so why not build it together? Have you noticed in your organization, anytime you try to do something, instead of picking any one person's idea, when you start synthesizing and arriving at an integrated way forward, it's much stronger, it's more resilient. So collaboration and co-creation truly come from a place of mindset, and it allows us to thrive. To engage with me in this powerful and important conversation of our times is Dr. Lewis. She and I are going to be talking about working together as a team, overcoming obstacles to thrive together. Dr. Lewis, I am so excited to have you today.
Cass, thank you so much for this opportunity and for the privilege of being a part of the ennobling book that you have put together and being able to work with the people that you've brought together in this process. I think one of the things that I just was reflecting on as I was preparing for this session with everybody was some of the conversations we've had. And we learned 2 weeks ago from Susie that, about well-being and how to become centered, right? And Thursday, Cheryl shared with us overcoming failure or changing your perspective of failure, because failure is not final, although we often tend to think of it that way. And then we've learned about transformation, engagement, and being inspired, right? So it's been such a great thing for me to just sit back and reflect on it, because all of those pieces are essential to collaboration.
Absolutely.
Right? Without that, we don't have it.
Yes. So let me take a moment and introduce you and these amazing things you have accomplished to the audience before we do a deep dive. So Dr. Lewis earned her PhD from University of Minnesota School of Public Health and has the following as part of her toolkit: Hospital and Healthcare Management, MBA Carlson School of Management, University of Minnesota, Finance, MSN, New York University, Rory Meyer School of Nursing, Patient Child Healthcare Certification as a coach by organizations such as ICF, Marshall Goldsmith, Gallup, Patrick Lucinio, 5 Behavioral Teams, Leadership Circle, NLP Master Coach, PXT Personality Tools, Predictive Index, and Scrum. Through our revolutionary mastermind groups, collaborative ecosystems, members step into a group of carefully selected partners committed to the mutual success of each member by addressing together an agreed upon challenge they want to resolve for their collective benefits. This may be in areas such as supply chain process and access, talent acquisition, and efficient use of resources. By collaborating, members increase their profitability by multiples of what they can do individually. So please welcome Dr. Lewis. And Lewis, why don't you get started with talking to us about how did you go from healthcare into this world of collaboration and helping organizations collaborate for success? Because it didn't happen overnight.
Well, you're right about that. Nothing happens overnight, right? And you're right. It's quite a transition in many ways, and yet it seems natural. So in healthcare, I was working with regional systems with medical schools, basically, to put together systems that would decrease mortality and morbidity, so illness rates with women and children, and was passionate about how do you pull disparate groups of people together. So best example is in West Texas, where we were really struggling with infant and neonate death rates that were far in excess of the regional or the national norm. And to change that, you just don't change it by telling people to change. We had to get people at the local community levels involved, the lay practitioners that were delivering babies on the floor or in mobile homes. We had to get doctors who were not fully licensed involved and not feeling shamed or guilty or less than. We had to embrace them and make them part of a team that was going to come together. So that was a huge learning. It's possible. Because in about 2 years, we were able to bring that region within the national norm. So during that period of time, as often happens in life, right, I had our first child. And as you know, things go, everything I had worked to prevent, I had every complication you could imagine. And we struggled with that for quite some time. And when he finally got to 3rd grade, we realized that we had some major problems and that the school, it was beyond what the school could help us with. So at that point, then we went and got private testing for him. And we were told that he would never read, write, or do math. And we should look at alternatives for him. And Harvard confirmed that. Mayo confirmed it. They said there was nothing in research that was published where they could offer us help. And at that time, I was finishing my PhD. I was teaching. I was working with a local hospital. And I'm looking at that and I'm saying, what can you do? What can we do? Well, the first thing you do when I think, for me, what I learned from that is the first thing that you do is you plan for the worst. So we had to plan for what if he never was going to read, write, do math. That would mean group home. What are the skill sets that people in a group home need to have? Well, actually, they need to balance a checkbook. So now I'm back to, we've got to have some basic math skills. How do we do that? But also the privilege of being the head of a department at a major teaching university is you go to department head meetings. And that started me on a fascinating journey of exploring how does the brain work. And the Department of Engineering was one of my biggest assets. I would go to their meetings and I'd say, I just read your article on, how these electrons you're manipulating them. How can I use that with the brain? Then I go home and put together a program for my child. And so we continued that process for quite some time. And then during that time, I realized I couldn't travel all over the country, being the heads of various national committees and setting standards. I needed to really focus on this child. So started a manufacturing company that I owned because I figured that I totally would control my time and could manage things more effectively. And although I did manage my time, I had not a clue how much energy it takes to start a business. And during that time, invented several products. I have 22 patents and trademarks, took the company globally, and then sold it just before COVID. So at that point, I said, okay, I have all of these different experiences. And my passion is really how do we build and make things better? And so started in with the consulting and looking at how do we collaborate, because that was the sweet spot that I brought to everything that I had done. So I want to finish that story with my son, just if I may. So as he approached his junior year, one of my fears was, what do I do with him? He was reading at that point, he was doing math, but you have all the tests. And my druthers was to have special testing for him and skip the SATs and do a different format, which was allowed for college entrance exams. And he said, no, I need to know really where I sit. And he took his SATs and he came in on the 99th percentile. And what I learned was everything I had taught him was using the right brain, transferring it to the left brain to be able to talk about it, but really keeping it in the center. Checking a circle is a right brain activity. He excelled at that. And so he went on, did his MBA, his CPA. He headed mergers and acquisitions for a major accounting firm, and now is a CFO of a Fortune 100 company. So, back to what Cheryl was talking about is what looks like lack of success or failure may be actually the foundation from which you build something even more beautiful. That was the lesson I learned from him. So that's how I got into what I'm doing. Never would I have planned it.
Oh my, that is just heartwarming, heartbreaking, and very inspirational. Thank you so much for being vulnerable enough to share that, Dr. Lewis. And truly, the wisdom there is don't let circumstances dictate. Find another way, find another alternative, right? And if you can't jump over, find a way to go around, find a way to break through in one way or the other. And ultimately, the entire success happened because you were comfortable asking for help. You were comfortable asking people to help you figure this out. But that is not normally a trait people are comfortable having, because in the Western world, it's thought of as a weakness that you have to ask for help. So why don't you, because you have this Japanese American cultural integration based background, I truly want you to take a moment and talk about how your Japanese experience allowed you and gave you a slightly different mindset, and how you can help other people take from that to build for themselves.
Sure. So I think, Cass, there's a couple things relative. I treasure my Japanese perspective because I lived in Japan till I was 19 years old. So it's my stable datum. It's where my heart will always reside, right? So when my soul is not at rest, I sink into those experiences of childhood because they ground me. So part of the Japanese culture is much more patient, and they are much more willing to look at what it is. They are like us. They have judgments. They have barriers to making things happen. But there's a sense of, let me look through and see if I can see beyond this. Can I see things differently? One of my dearest friends as a child, he would talk about at his company, they would have periods of time at lunchtime where they would like have a cup on the table and say, what all can we use a cup for? How could we do this cup differently? What else could a cup be used? How could we refashion it for something else? He was in the transportation business. And you go, why would you take lunchtime with your employees to do that? And the point was, you have to expand your thinking and see beyond what's in front of you for peripheral vision. So one of the frustrations that people often have from the Western culture working with the Japanese is they don't look at you in your eyes necessarily. And so one day I said to a business colleague that I was working with, and I said, you know what, this is one of the things that frustrates Americans sometimes in working with Japanese. How do you know what is going on with your counterpart when you don't look them in the eyes? He says, my eyes see from the side and I feel them. And that's what I learned from my culture, Japanese culture, was feeling what's happening and take that feeling to the, because that internalizes, triggers your brain, but it starts here. And it's when the heart is missing, the passion is missing, that we then don't go to the heart to find solutions. So, and I was in Japan, post-war Japan, and saw a country totally have to rebuild itself. And the pressures, the challenges that people had, the resilience that they had. Oh my goodness, they had a resilience that came from deep within. But they had a culture also that helped one another in that rebuilding process.
And that's fascinating that you brought the insight about being able to feel what's going on and seeing with your heart more than just your eyes. Because ultimately, for each of us to show up as a whole person, we need to show up with our mind, our heart, and our actions. And if we only show up as a thinking person, we're not bringing our feelings in, we're not bringing our action in, and we all tend to go to one or the other for comfort purposes.
Right.
When we can integrate all three, that is powerful. And thank you for sharing that nugget, because that is something that most Western traditions don't understand about the Eastern tradition, because we need to be able to see more than with our eyes. And we need to be able to smile with more than our mouth and our teeth, right? Smiling with our eyes is more genuine, and seeing with our heart and listening with our heart actually takes us to a deeper place. And that is a powerful way to build collaboration, because we are truly giving space and allowing others to show up the way they are. So what have some of your successes been in merging your Eastern experience with your Western experience to help organizations thrive, including how you built your organization while you were going through some of those very, very unimaginable personal challenges?
So I think that there's one other experience, and I'll just share it because it's that also that really has changed how I perceive things. And that is, my mother was a prisoner of war during the Second World War of a Japanese prison camp, and she survived, obviously. And one of the things that we would talk about, what did you learn from that? What she wanted to share was not the difficulty, it was, what did you learn? And one of her stories that I think it was part of what kept me going with my son, was that at night they knew who would not be awake in the morning. And I would say to her, how do you know that? How can you know who won't be alive in the morning? And she said, it's when they lose hope, they don't wake up. And so it's that element of hope. Human soul needs hope in order to move forward. So some of the things, so that's what I created for my son. This is the worst case, but let me build hope. Let me look at to create a future, what could be. So that's really what I bring to organizations. When I was working in OBGYN as well, one of our areas was cancer GYN, where people were, all the treatments had been done that could be done, the pharmaceuticals, as much could be given, had been given, and we were really looking for what else could be done. And so I took that aspect of, how do I see, how do I feel with my heart, and how do I build hope? And the interesting thing is, as we developed a program that created that, our mortality rate for end-stage cancer began to decline. So I do that with business. I do that with employees. It's not about what's wrong. It's how do we build a future? And that future has to have a hope in it, and it has to be built from the heart.
And I love how you phrase that. Even cancer can be dealt with if there is hope, if there is joy, and if there is that positive mindset and that positive brain chemistry, because that affects our body chemistry. Having been the wife of a cancer patient for the last 4 years and having gone through it, I know for sure that our ability to sing and dance and laugh through it was more important than all the other things that came medically. And I know as long as I was happy and I was positive, my husband drew from that, right? Mm-hmm. So you were able to be that place of hope, that place of positivity, and your son drew from you. How can we then take that as a success trait, as a leadership trait, and pass it on to others? Because no matter what's happening in the economy, what's happening in the society around us, it's not a failure, as Dr. Cheryl talked last program, and it's not the end of the road, because as long as there is hope and as long as we believe, we can find a way out, provided we're able to work with one another.
Right. So I think two things, Cass, for me is the human brain gets stuck on what doesn't work. So when you hit an impossibility or a failure or a stop, where you get stuck, it's like a broken record. You replay it, and you're stuck. So one of the things that I do with organizations when I'm working with them is we make a list of all the things that could go wrong, and we actually plan for it. Because once it's planned for, then the brain is freed up and we can move to what are the possibilities. But the brain can't go there until we've gotten rid of the baggage. So the same thing with our cancer patients. When I was dealing with them, it was, how do we deal with, I'm going to die, right? I mean, we were very upfront about that. So let's do the will, let's talk with the attorney, write your letters to your children for their wedding, for all the events that you're maybe going to miss, that you're worried about missing. Let's get it all done. And then now that it's done, how do we start to live? Where's the future? How do we begin to live for that? Same thing in business. The economy is awful. Right now, the Gallup just came out with some research, and they said that 76% of people do not trust their organizations. And that I think it's 24% come to work every day sad. The 45% say they're not thriving. So, you look at that and you go, people are desperate for, please show me, is there a future? How can I see beyond all of what's going on? And we have that ability to give that gift. So why not do that?
Very much so. And ultimately, that is the most precious thing that we can pass on. Mm. So when you are able to go into organizations, work with your clients, and show them the possibilities while they have plans for addressing any points of failure, because that is risk mitigation.
Right.
How do they receive it? And do you run into any reception issues, and how do you overcome those? Because not everybody is going to bring the right mindset. You may have to do some gardening there.
Oh, you have to do a lot of gardening. And because, especially in our culture, anything touchy-feely, we push away from. We can't do that. We want it analytical, feeling from the heart and making decisions from the heart. That's not analytical, right? So, and if MBTI is something that they've used, I love that, because that one goes through, the thinking, the personality, the sensing, the personality has all those components. It's not just the analytical. And that they get because that's an analytical tool, right? So I do walk people through from an analytical standpoint first, but in a way they solve that. I mean, they take care of that themselves, because as soon as you open the discussion, it's all the what can'ts. This can't be we did this and it doesn't work. This doesn't work. That doesn't work. Can't do that because of this person. Can't do that because of that department. And on and on. So you just make that list. They give you the list, whether or not you ask for it. And so it's like, okay, now that we got this list, and what if all of that? Well, what if could be like my son, you're going to be in a home for children with special needs, right? Or adults with special needs. And so you start looking at that, go, is that what we want? Is this where we're headed? Or can we also look at another path? And because we've thought about this, we have a plan for this. When this starts to not work, we know we can go back there, pick up those pieces, put that in place until we can move forward again with what we're seeing as the future need. It's not a straight line. We'll move in and out. And so that's why it's really important to have both pieces prepared, because you're going to go back there and you're going to have to pick up some of those elements as you move forward.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you pointed out that it is not a straight line. If we take a business continuous improvement, risk mitigation mindset, movement happens, plan, do, check, act, reframe, and then move forward, plan, do, check, act, that next step. So it's actually cyclical motion going upward and forward. And that allows us to never slip back, because we've always verified and corroborated before taking the next step forward. And I love how you are taking that approach, because that actually creates an inherent fail-safe, personally and professionally. So as you think about all the tools and ways you help organizations and individuals collaboratively move forward, what are 3 success traits that people find helpful to build that kind of environment?
Okay, so let me relate it to collaboration, because that's more specific and it allows people to take away something that they can hold on to, I think. So 3 things in collaboration that will allow, that really puts these pieces together for you, is with mindset, but it's a diverse mindset. And, part of what you have brought out, Cass, is the different backgrounds, experiences each of us has, right? Because that's a mindset that we bring, and it's a diversity. So the interesting thing is there was some research that was done by Francis Galton in 1906, which I just love his research, because he came to the table and said, I'm going to prove that the only people who can make good decisions are experts. And he was a statistician. And so that was his journey. And what he loved to do research on was livestock. And so he went to a livestock fair in London, and saw that there was this ox that was brought forward, and people were to guess the dressed weight of this ox. And whoever, got the closest to the weight would get a prize, a purse of money. And so when it was all finished, he went to the judge and he said, can I have all the slips of paper with the guesses? And he took them and he went home and he began to analyze them. Which of the guesses of these various people came closest to the dressed weight? There were the livestock people. There were the vets, the people who worked with the cattle all the time, the expert category. There were the people who were the hands that just mucked out the pens and kept the place clean, right? And then you had the general population that just milled around and were curious. Here's what's interesting. When he took a look at all of that, the group of people that came closest to the dressed weight was the aggregate. You take all of those people from those milling around to the experts and averaged their weight, and you were within 1 pound of the dressed weight. No one else came close, right? So his conclusion was, if we just look to the experts, we'll never get close to the truth, because it's the diversity of opinion that will get you to the truth. And I think that's what gets us so stuck in organizations, is we tend to do everything in isolation. The executive team meets, they make decisions. Management meets, they make decisions. Teams meet, they make their decisions and develop their tactics and strategies. But if you really want to solve a problem, it's got to be this whole stream coming together with their very different perspectives. So that's one, is looking at that breadth, that depth. And then the other is being independent in your ability to speak your mind. And that one I worry about a lot right now, because we have such a PC culture. People are afraid to tell what they think about anything. Will I offend? Is this what my boss wants to hear? Is this the direction the board is going in? So we're holding things inside that then keep us from being able to really do what we need to do. And then, do we have the people closest to the problem actually involved? So we tend to, in management, solve problems, but the problem, so I was working with a group, and the management team was trying to decide what to do with a division that was losing money. But the division that was losing money was not involved in the discussion. And you go, how do you solve the problem? So you've got to get the people closest to the problem. And sometimes that's the production line. Sometimes it's the salespeople. It's a lot of times it's the people we just step over because we think, what will they contribute? I know I'm the expert. So it's those three things that I think of. It's a diversity of group, independence in your ability to think, and then people as close to the problem as possible.
That is an excellent list. And let's actually make sure we note that down and we take it into our everyday lives and the way we come up and deal with situations. So as we wrap up our direct conversation and open it up to the live audience dialogue here, Dr. Lewis, how has this collaborative journey of writing the book been for you, especially that you bring this collaborative mindset and that collaboration expertise to the forefront? I am just curious to hear your thoughts on how this is going for you.
So for me, the joy of it has been listening to the other co-authors, because it doesn't matter who you are or how. I can think that I have a breadth of perspective, right? Because I'm dealing with collaboration all the time. But I'm still narrow. I have my own perspective. And so it really is wonderful to hear other people and what they're doing, how they've tackled their challenges, and because it gives me a broader perspective. It also reinforces things that I already know. So that part I have really loved. So it's that reinforcement, it's that broadening of who I am. And I think anytime we grow and we learn, we just become better. This is a great, diverse group.
Thank you. Thank you. I am so glad to hear. And the book is titled Ennobling Business for Success. And to me, the beauty of it is in this process, we are each becoming more ennobled, and we are passing our respective lights to brighten each other. And it has truly been rewarding. And for those who are listening and watching, please mark your calendars. October 5th, Ennobling Business for Success is launching, and you're going to love Lois's chapter on collaboration, and every chapter, every author is contributing. So please be sure to take advantage of the special promotion. And with that, I am going to open it up for conversation with our live audience here. So go ahead, folks.
I will start, Lois. Brilliant work. I posted something in the chat because this is my doctoral area as well. And I'm really wanting to know what you might think of the word strategic literacy. It's something that came up in 2004 by Peck and Durgan, and they're very close to what you're looking at for Gagan's reference for way back in the early 1900s, that only those who are experts or only those in the C-suite have the knowledge, the acumen, the experience to make strategic decisions. And we now know they only have the responsibility. They just need to know where to look.
They need to know. And I think that's one of the most valuable things that the experience with my son taught me is I was an expert, but I had not a clue where to start.
Exactly.
Right. And I had to accept that I was ignorant and be willing to go get help. But that is so hard because we train people to be brilliant, to lead. Lead is I'm going to take hold, manage it. I'm going to control. Right. And what you're talking about is a letting go.
Well, and that's tough
opening
because
up.
leadership doesn't work that way. And we think that only those who have the title are leaders. You were a leader simply because you had someone else following you. That's leadership by definition. And so you had the power. So I wonder, my question is this, is it not a knowledge thing, but a confidence thing that we don't believe we're leaders because we think leaders are a noun and not a verb?
Well, I think that's true. I think, Cheryl, those of us who've experienced failure also are advantaged because we no longer fear failure. We know it's not final. People who've not experienced it are always living in the fear that it's going to be final.
I think that's brilliant.
That is brilliant. Thank you for the question, Dr. Cheryl. And I love the answer because ultimately, our life experiences are polishing us. And if we've never been rubbed hard around the edges, how do we know? How would we know how to be resilient? I once worked for an employer where they never hired anybody who's never been through hardships in life because their belief was that going through hardships have honed your ability to become resilient. It's that ability that's going to help you succeed and help our organization succeed. And there are organizations that consciously look for that. And it's a brilliant reminder that hardships and challenges and roadblocks are not the end. They truly are making us better than we ought to be. Thank you for that. Yes, Dr. Menon, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question because, as you know, medicine is a very hierarchical organization. And a lot of times, the leader, who is the physician, is the person that only sees the tree and not the forest. You know, so how do you have any skill sets or any way of approaching that situation where the person that is in charge, you know, how do you make them accept criticism that is not actually criticism, it's positive, you know, to try and take the clinic and the business in a direction that's actually working for everyone, including themselves, when they themselves don't see it. We're in that little rut of seeing just the tree.
Thank you for that question, because I think it's really an important question right now. New England Journal of Medicine, I think in the last 3 months, said that 20% of physicians are going to quit in the next year or two, 40% of nurses because they're burned out, they're exhausted, frustrated, dealing with the system. Those are scary data. And so I think when you look at the hierarchy, the physicians, one of the things physicians are feeling right now is they feel disempowered. They used to drive the engine. They don't drive the engine to the extent they once thought. But within clinical practice and dealing with patients and the system, they do. They're at the top of the food chain. And so one of the things that Jack Schneider, who was he had recruited me to come down and join him at the medical school in Texas to put in place some of the things that I'd done at the University of Minnesota. And one of the things that he taught me, he was just a brilliant man. And he said, Lois, we were charged with bringing mortality rates down for women and children in West Texas. And Texans are not very, what do I say? They're very opinionated, and they're not easily pushed into something, right? They've got their big cowboy boots on and their hats, and they know they're right. And when you from the north just go home, we'll be able to manage just fine, thank you, was sort of the attitude. So what do we do? And we were both, Jack and I were both from the north. And Jack taught me, he said, Lois, first of all, there's a lot of things wrong, but we're not going to fix it by looking at it as being wrong. We're going to look at it as an opportunity to do it in a different way. Well, how do we do that? So we'd bring groups together, cross-functional physicians from different hospitals, the nurses, and we go through cases. We'd say, bring a case that you want to learn from, and let's walk through it together. So that was one of the ways we did it. We also went to within the hospital organizations. We would sit down with the hierarchy from administration down to the lower ranks, and look at what was really going on, but talking about the challenges and where are the opportunities. What keeps people from getting into a real discussion is that fear of you're going to make me wrong. So even I was helping a small hospital in Pakistan, Northwest Frontier, for a period of time. And even there, I tried to introduce their having the clinical team come together and look at how can we provide care in a better, more effective way. Even there, in a very small place where people are dependent on one another, there was fear of, well, you're going to make me wrong. And so you have to get past that. You have to get to, it's not about being wrong, it's how we're going to be better. And in medicine right now, there's that fear of being wrong is huge because you get sued. That was always one of the questions we had to deal with, is if we sit down and talk about what's not working, somebody gets a record of this, we could get sued, right? So you have to be very sensitive to how you're approaching it, because it's not only the feelings, there's realities of what it is that people deal with. But I think people are hungry for it, to your point, to look at things in a more collaborative way. They just need help. They need tools. They need to see that it can be done and it can be effective. They're hungry.
What a timely question, Nandini. And I absolutely adore the way you approached an effective solution, Louis. And this is something that it's not just in the United States, Canada, all over the developed world. This is something that we are dealing with in the middle of healthcare services shortage. The good people are choosing to leave, and that is a dangerous precedence. And we have to figure out a way forward. Thank you for that. And Marquise, I know you have a question, so go ahead.
I do, man. Wow, what a team. Dr. Lewis, thank you so much for your insights. As I'm sitting here, I'm thinking we've got to become the next Martha Stewart and Snoop Dogg together. Like, I love as I look at the work that you've done and that you do, and your cross-cultural life experience, I think about mine on a different scale, and I hear us talk about healthcare, and what comes to mind for me is I would love to do some research with you, because at the core of it all, it's a clash of cultures, right? Regardless if it's healthcare, if it's neighborhoods, and I feel like that the work that you've been doing, that there is another opportunity for its expression in the world that can allow us to just all get along, right? Like there's that pervading fear that exists in our culture. If we can find ways to continue to help people pull that back through more exposure, that there's a possibility for a lot more healing to transpire, which would then move into healthcare and other aspects. But when we live with fear, simply because we don't know one another, it then controls how we live. And I'm just so excited about the work you do. And I really just want to comment that I'm really blown away. I really want to do some more research around it. And wow, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I think that would be great. I think we need to heal our communities. There's a lot of places where these tools can be
Yeah.
used. But it's you're right. It's having an opportunity, creating the opportunity for that to happen. So I'll tell you what, I'm always open. Just let me know and we can start a conversation.
Well, I'll end with, I love that you said having an opportunity, and then you switched to the one that I love the most, creating one. So we'll create something. But thank you so much for your work. Dr. Cass, thank you for having her on the team.
My honor, my honor. It is, universe is a magical thing. The energy we put out is what attracts everything, right? So we are making magic here and we are building, and I am thrilled that this is going to become larger than a book. This is going to become a movement. And together, we're not just going to ennoble business for success. We're going to ennoble our communities to thrive. And ultimately, that is our shared purpose. And for that, I am so grateful to every one of the co-authors who are making this possible. We have time for one more question. So go ahead, Robin.
Okay, I'm greetings from Croatia. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, better than 7 in the morning in California. And I'm completely blown away by your story, Dr. Lois, really just amazing. I want to go back to something you shared in the very, very beginning, where you were working with these medical people, and you said that you wanted to kind of bring them up to speed, so to speak, but not have them feel shamed or less than. So how did you navigate that, helping bring them up to speed, but in a way that wasn't shaming or blaming or, scolding?
So part of where we started was with ourselves. We'd invite people to join us, or we'd go to them, to whatever group we were putting together, and we'd say, this is what we're struggling with right now. Here's let's say it's a patient, okay? But here's a person that came to us, presented to us. Here are the challenges we're facing. Here is where we didn't do what we should have done, probably. And so let me give you an example of how we did that. In West Texas, does not have state income tax, and therefore, in our country, at least at that time, Medicaid is a matching federal state program. So if you don't have state funding, you don't have access to the Medicaid dollars at the rate that other states do. So Texas did not. We had to refer people to the providers of Medicaid, which meant a 400-mile drive for people. It was too far for people to go if they were sick. We had a person came in very sick, could not make that trip. There was no way of paying for her care. And so we were struggling with, what do we do? How do we manage this? And we came with our judgments about, isn't the system here broken? Why don't Texans have a state income tax? They wouldn't have this problem. So we were in all of our heads with judgment. And it was just, let's push this ball further and make them deal with this. And so we were kind of putting it out there in this group of this that we had convened. So we're sharing our perspectives, our problem, and looking for input and sharing how we're planning to manage it. So here's where collaboration works. One of the people in the group said, well, just a minute. This person is African American, right? We said, yes. Well, her great granddaddy must have worked on one of the plantations. I don't know, we said. Well, he said, why don't you go ask? And he said, maybe if you go ask, he will pay for her medical care. Inside, I laughed, because I thought, who in their wildest mind would ever do that, right? But I was challenged. And so I went to find this family that this woman's great great granddaddy had worked for and shared with him my frustration with the Texas system, how we were being absolutely disadvantaged, could not do the best of medical care because if it weren't for you and you all and your bad way of approaching things, we would have it better, right? So I went with all the wrong attitudes. And as I shared with him what was going on, he looked at me and he said, "You are right. Her great granddaddy picked cotton on our plantation." He said, "How much did you say it was going to cost for her medical care?" I said, "I don't know, but this is what we're estimating." It was a large, large number. He went and got his checkbook and wrote me a check, paid for her medical care. It transformed me because I realized my judgments were wrong because people told me we're prejudiced. Maybe that's not true. And his comment was, her great granddaddy was family, right? So he was responding as family. Now, right? So when we did that, what happened was I was wrong. I'm sitting in this committee, this group of people, we're trying to implement change. They saw me having to eat crow and go pick up the pieces. That's how we did it. You don't do it by making them pick up the pieces first. You show your own biases first and where your problems are and your willingness to be wrong and adjust.
Beautiful. Amazing, amazing story and great collaboration. And yes, we do need to,
Absolutely love
we do
that
need to eat
question.
crow once in a while. Yeah.
We do a lot of crow.
And ultimately, I love the brilliance of demonstrating the ability to model the behavior, right? So none of us are perfect. And how do we deal with it? And through that lived example, show how everybody can step up and deal. And you also modeled that there is nothing wrong in having a humbling moment.
Mm.
And to me, that is so powerful. We could keep talking for hours, Lois, but unfortunately, this is only an hour show. So when we take a road trip and we do these workshops all over the world, this is going to be a fascinating, engagement and interaction with all the authors. But how can, in the meanwhile, people reach out to you, find you, collaborate with you, share with our audience the best way to reach you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn and my information is on LinkedIn. So Lois Sonstegard on LinkedIn. And that's probably the easiest because you won't remember probably anything else I tell you. But I have two websites. One is www.buildtomorrow.com, and that 2 is a number 2. And then the other is startwithcollaboration.com. And my email, the best email is lois@buildtomorrow.com. So please, I would look forward to any conversations. And we do need to make things different. People are hungry for different. And we've got a great group of people who can make that happen. So I look forward to that.
Thank you so much, Lois. It has been such an honor and a privilege to spend this hour talking with you, sharing your insights and your wisdom with our global audience, and to our live audience here for bringing everything forward to make this a truly invigorating experience. So, as we always remind ourselves, every human interaction is our opportunity for transformation. So go out there without being afraid. Open yourselves up, see with your heart, and listen with your heart, and start transforming lives. And in that process, please do not lose the opportunity to transform yourself.
Mm.